there's two parts to situation awareness, kind of like an epoxy. You get the resin and the catalyst, you got to put them together, mix them together, and that's when you get the glue. Situation awareness, you've got scanning. Sometimes we're just scanning like a radar, and sometimes we are focusing like a laser beam. But the rub is we can't do both at the same time. You can't be a floodlight and a spotlight at the same time.
Jake Mazulewicz, thank you so much for joining us today.
So much for having me here. Yeah, looking forward to it. We prepped, and I think you've got some good questions, and looking forward to trying to give you as much good ideas as I can, as many good ideas as I can. Yeah.
You've got a lot of good ideas. Being somebody, I don't think we've ever had someone that's been a military paratrooper, a firefighter, and an EMT on the show. I don't. So you're covering a lot of bases here.
Took kind of a weird path. It's like I'm 58 right now, and I think I'm pretty close to figuring out what I want to be when I grow up. So it took me a while.
It always intrigues me how people in the safety space, there's so many different paths that can be taken to really get there. Tell us a little bit about what that journey was like for you.
Um, you mentioned a couple of the crazy things that I did when I was young and immortal. I was in college. I was studying psychology, which I'm still doing today. I mean, that's been the kind of constant thread throughout my life is applying psychology. Back then, I didn't know what to do with it. Very, very different. Um, but I knew I wanted something more real than just studying stuff. And so I went to a very rural college, not a whole lot to do, not big into sports, not big into drinking. So I joined the fire department. And that was my first entree into the whole world of technical training, technical skills, not academic concepts, but put the wet stuff on the red stuff, as firefighters say. Um, learned how to drive the trucks, learned how to drive stick shift on a 1968 John Bean and Son pumper tanker with a split axle and a double clutch. And if none of that means anything to you, you're in the majority. Almost nobody knows what that means anymore, maybe some tractors. But anyway, I started getting practical at that point. And of course, firefighter, it was a lot about safety, protecting other people's and protecting our own. And I went from there to doing EMT stuff. Different people took different adventures after they graduated. Like, what are we going to do next? I enlisted in the Army. Um, um, started out actually wanting to go get a Green Beret, and so joined Special Forces. And it was a National Guard group that I was in. Went through basic training, engineer training, jump school, which is the paratrooper school. Did not make it through the Special Forces training. Was invited back, chose not to come back. Long story there, I won't bore you with. But then did the rest of my time for National Guard, the weekends and evenings and stuff like that for a couple of years. So it did not wind up going full time at all after that. So learned a lot about reliability and safety in the military and as an EMT as well. So all of those three things that you mentioned, they happened a while ago, but if you're older, you know that you remember moments that happened like they happened yesterday. And you may not feel that, you're pretty young, but like 20 years from now, you may remember specific things that happened when you were this age, whereas the entire rest of the year is a big haze. And those things kind of, define your life. So I've had a few of those experiences. Um, I went and got a PhD in education, thought I wanted to go be a professor, was a professor for a while. Um, it was just too academic. I know that sounds like Jake. It took you a while to figure that out. So I joke and I say I'm a recovering academic. Um, I still love kind of looking at the research from time to time. I like primary sources and original quotes, which I try to do in my book. But if that path didn't work out, so I wound up going to work for a large electric utility in the safety and training department because of my training background. And as I was there for the training side, I got into the safety. And from the safety, I got into what's the human performance and the high reliability operations. And stayed at that company for about 10 years, realized I was kind of cramping me. And I'm like, I need to grow and move more. And so I've been I left there in July of 2015 and been running my own company ever since, doing workshops and keynotes and event reviews for everybody across North America.
So quite the journey.
Maybe I don't know if that's more than what you wanted, but that's about the shortest version I can give you of that. I hope it made sense.
No, it does, and it's interesting because you can kind of see how everything that you did really could play a part in where you landed today. So I know you brought up the book. You recently released a book here, 7 Practical Steps: How to Build Reliability, Safety, and Trust in Technical Teams. So in putting this book together, how did you kind of come up with the various philosophies, ideas? I know there's a few that I'd like to explore here, but what kind of led you to this?
I lost a bet, really, is what happened. So that was no, it's I built the steps kind of one by one, or collected the steps one by one. And it started actually with steps, what are now steps 5, 6, and 7. When I was doing research into just different ways to manage air, what are the best, what are some of the best ways that the safest and most reliable teams on the planet look at errors? And what I found was, as I'm reading and looking into the research, and I've read most of these books, not all of them, but most of them, a couple are just for show. Um, I got 3 different kind of strategies. One was, here, use some real practical techniques to reduce errors, like checklist, peer check, 3-way communication. Aviation uses them, nuclear power uses them, really good. But there's a big drawback. They make a very punitive person-based culture. Another strategy was improving processes, which looked a little bit better, a little more complex. That's now step 6. But the advanced stuff was, hey, errors are going to happen. Stop trying to prevent all errors and just minimize the consequences of errors. That's now step 7, build resilience. And I went, well, those 3 things are telling me 3 different things, and they're not always compatible, but they're related. And it took me a couple of months with just dozens of index cards sitting on my desk, kind of going, what's the pattern here? And then it hit me was, it's 3 different strategies. They're all related, but it's almost like you don't have to use, they're not mutually exclusive. Many companies and teams use more than one, but they're different. So those became steps 5, 6, and 7. That was the core, but I taught that for a while, practiced that for a while, went, something's missing. And what I was missing was steps 1 through 4, which is building a learning based community, actually building a culture where learning and continuous improvement is the norm. You got to do that first. That's steps 1 through 4. Then you can get to steps 5, 6, and 7. That was a good question. I don't know if anybody has ever asked me that before, is where did the steps come from? But that's, they I started with step 5, then added 6, then 7. But back then they were steps 1, 2, and 3. Then I had to go back and add, here's a bunch in the meantime, kick all the rest down. And that's how we got to 1 through 7.
So building out a team, you mentioned that you really have to create the culture first here for the rest of the steps to be able to follow. What are some of those initial processes, if you could walk me through how we start to create the team environment that will really lead to success later on?
I'll tell you, one of the best experiences I had was one of the oldest ones, which was on the fire department. I joined when I was a second year in college, went through the basic training, which was, we're all volunteers. So it was about 2 days a week for about 6 weeks or so, and then you're call out qualified, and you get to go on actual fires. And my first fire was a dumpster fire. That's not a figurative
Yeah, figure speech. Yeah.
a dumpster fire, right? But it went well. And I thought, okay, this is how it is. We go home and we clean up the trucks and we repackage the air tanks and all that. And I thought, I guess we go home now. I didn't know. It's my first fire. Somebody caught me and said, no, we're not done yet. Come in with me. And we got into a small room and we did this after action review. And it was the chief. I thought the chief was going to yell at us and say, you did this wrong, do this better next time. That's what leaders did to my 19-year-old mind. But this leader, this chief of this department, did not do this. He asked 5 questions, kind of one at a time. And and then he shut up. And he's the person that talked the least in the whole thing. We all talked. I didn't talk much. I was brand new, but all the pump operator spoke up, the attack line crew spoke up, traffic control people spoke up. And I still remember that conversation, even though it happened 30 something years ago, because I felt safe there to open up. I felt like even if I said I didn't do this exactly right, nobody was going to slam me or say you're wrong or whatever. But they were going to say, well, here's how you could do it better next time. And I went, I'm hooked on these things, man. I want more of this. And so to answer your question, if there's one thing that an organization could do to kind of get started, I would say it's going to be in chapter 3. It's after action reviews, and they're semi-structured, non-punitive post-job debriefs. And that's what you can do a good after action review once you practice it a couple of times, try it out. You can do a good one in 25 minutes, 25 minutes. And if you do that once a week, maybe twice a week continuously, it starts slow, but then the payoffs just kind of go like this.
It sort of builds up momentum, and this is something that I've heard from multiple professionals now, is that engagement and really bringing the teams in, and everyone's you know uh, getting everyone's take on what's happening, what happened, and how we can improve. You're really utilizing the collective knowledge of everyone there, right? Because how much could we be missing out on if, like you said, it's just the chief getting up there and talking, right? And that chief could be the foreman or whatever you want. But what is that impact for the crews? How do they feel, or employees, when their opinions and their insights are kind of heard? What is that downstream impact?
There's a good story. It's another speaker named Mike Abrashoff, who's a Navy captain, and he was his first command. All excited, finally got command of a ship, and it was the worst ship in the Navy. Like culture wise, and it's like it is a hot mess. It's toxic. It's mechanically it's fine. It's just nobody wants to be on that ship, and now he's the commander. Yay! And so what he did was come in and take what I would call a learning based approach, not just to errors, but to everything. And he set up one on one meetings with every single sailor on board, not group meetings, one on one, the captain and you, the captain. And it was 310 people. That's a lot of cups of coffee, right? And and so he asked everybody, what do you like about working on this ship? It's called the USS Benfold. What do you not like about working on this ship? If you were in my job, Captain, what's one change you would make to your job? And I love that question. It's sort of like in the real world, if you had a reasonable amount of authority or whatever, you can't wave a magic wand, but if you could do pretty much anything you wanted within reason to your job, what would you do and why? And they started coming up with ideas carefully, not many people because they'd been burned before, but then he started actually taking action on those ideas. Not everyone, right? Some were like, no, we you cannot go water skiing behind a guided missile destroyer. It doesn't work that way, but thank you. But a lot of the ideas he did take, and some of them people had been, keeping under their hats for years, or they've tried to speak up for years, decades, and nobody listened to him. And when the captain of the ship started actually taking the risk, relative risk, to try out this new idea, within 20 months, um, safety incidents went from 31 down to 2. Retention went from 28% up to 100%. Costs started coming in under budget regularly, not every time, but regularly. And they wound up winning the award for the best, most prepared combat ship, or most combat ready ship in the entire Pacific Fleet, half the US Navy. So they went from worst ship in the Navy to best in class in less than 2 years. And it was primarily because this leader, Abrashoff, took what I'd call a learning based approach, didn't say, you're going to do it, you're going to like it, my way or the highway. He said, you're expert at being a cook or being a navigator or being a gunnery sergeant or being a mechanic. How do you do your job? What do you need to do it better to serve the bigger mission? And when he engaged people like that, I'm sure not every conversation went perfectly. I'm sure there was a few holdouts or whatever. People were like, forget this. But the benefits dramatically outweighed the negatives. And that's one example I teach in my workshops, and I love telling that story as a keynoter. And I love it when people have read the book and I'll say, did I get my facts straight? And I think everybody that I've said asked so far has said, yeah, those numbers are accurate. And if it can work on a Navy ship with all the rules and stuff like that on a Navy ship, I'm pretty sure it can work pretty much anywhere.
Powerful example, right? To show the you ask the right questions, you get the feedback, and if you can implement it, you can really make significant change. And what I also like is that it highlights that these changes were not only, that improved ultimately safety on the ship, also had an impact where the overall efficient everything was running way smoother. So the impacts to the bottom line here are significant as well, just beyond just safety.
And the culture impacts too. It was, somebody has said, or several people have said, safety culture by itself doesn't exist. There's no example, at least that I know of a company with a really good safety culture but a horrible culture in every other aspect. It just doesn't exist. You either have a good culture, which is humanistic, it's learning based, it's psychologically safe, and it's physically safe, and it's process oriented, and people get listened to and trusted. You either have that all around, including safety, or you don't. So you can't just sidle out and say, well, we're only going to make improvements in safety, but nothing. That didn't work. And so, like all the stuff that I teach, I've had people come up to me and go, this is a different way of running a company. And it is, but I'm not a management expert. I don't have that kind of leadership credential. So I wouldn't say that out front. My specialty is errors and the psychology of learning from errors. So I start with that. But if people realize this isn't just about safety or about reliability, they're right.
That's a good point. Safety culture is culture, right? The two are 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 right in line, right? You can't have a great safety culture and a non-existent culture, right? The two are equivalent. So
About it. Have you ever seen a company that you're like, well, I would hate to work there. It's really terrible, but they're really safe?
yeah, you can't.
There is one. I can't think of one.
Can't. It's such a good point that you bring up there. The second step here in your book, build psychological safety. So, psychological safety obviously recently has kind of come to the forefront of a lot of discussions. Can you break down, I guess, first what it is and the impacts you've seen of really building a strong psychological safety within an organization? yeah.
Yes, I'll try. I'm psychological safety to me is a fancy word for trust at an organizational level. Not trust just between like two people, like you and I have a certain level of trust, but between a group, in a team, in a department. That's psychological safety. I have to give a tip of the hat to the leading researcher on the world in this, Amy Edmondson. And I always want to respect other people, other thought leaders. The person I mentioned before, Mike Abrashoff, he does have a book out there which I'd highly recommend called "It's Your Ship." It's actually that for Abrashoff. Earth. That's the ship. That's the guy. And then Edmondson wrote a book. Well, has written several books. This is one called "The Fearless Organization." See the fearless organ. See what she did there with the fear. Anyway, so so
Hey, Amy, if you're listening to this, we have tried to get her on the podcast a few times. No luck yet. We have.
wonderful. I do not know her. I would not claim to know her. I've read her stuff and respect it a lot. Um, I read this stuff, and I've read some, not all of this, but many other resources on psychological safety, not just Edmondson. What I noticed was, how to put this, there's a lot of theory and a lot of concepts out there, and we need those. But I'll say this: academics and I'm not pointing fingers at any particular one, and I used to be an academic, so I can get to say this. Academics tend to be descriptive, but not prescriptive. They will tell you how something works or how something should work, but they won't necessarily tell you how to work it or what steps to take or what actions to take. That's a little bit different. I must teach you that. I missed that day in PhD school, and they said don't do that, because I always like going, all right, but how do we do this? So when I read this in psychological safety, I went, it's super important. It's the core of pretty much every good team. Um, Google figured this out in a something in 2017 called with something called Project Aristotle. They studied Google studied 180 of their own teams, internal teams, to figure out which ones are really good and why, or why are the really good ones so good? What makes the top 10% of teams at Google so good? They came up with 5 things. 4 were pretty basic. They'd been researched before, but this other magical one, they're like, what is it? We don't even know what to describe it. And then they found Edmondson's research and went, that's it. It's psychological safety. So even Google kind of went, psychological safety, the key to good teams. What I realized is that there's a lot of theory out there and a lot of models, but when I ask people in my keynotes and my workshops, how many of you have heard of psychological safety? Like 90% of the hands go up, most hands go up. And I say, all right, based on what you've heard about psychological safety, do you think your organization could use more of it? And people are like, yeah, pretty much, right? And then I say, great, me too. And then I say, if psychological safety became your main mission, Monday morning, that is your job for the next week, to build psychological safety in your team. How many of you all would know what actions to take to do it? And you look around and there's no hands up. Almost never. We all agree that it's important. We all agree that we could use more of it, but almost nobody knows how to build it. That's what I've tried to put into chapter 2. I give 4 or 5 different methods that I've used personally, and that there is some research backing on as well. But that's what I've tried to do, including one of them is asking specific questions to build psychological safety, like the one Abershoff asked. Hey, if you were captain of this ship, what's one change you would make to your job if you were captain? That's a great question to build psychological safety. Another one that I've used, I got from a mentor 20 years ago, is um, may I have permission to give you feedback? Yeah. As opposed to, hey, Mark, let me tell you something. I mean, I've gotten feedback that way before, and I'm like, yeah, the walls come down. I can listen, even if it's good feedback. But if I come to you and I say, hey, Mark, we were just in an hour-long meeting and we're talking one-on-one, can I have permission to give you some feedback? Or at least I might say, hey, Mark, can I have permission to share an observation with you and notice something about what you're doing in the meeting? You may or may not be aware of it. May I have permission to share that with you? See how that puts you in the driver's seat? It puts you in control, and it's not something I'm forcing on you. That to me builds a lot of psychological safety. So that's what I put into chapter 2, a bunch of practical things like that that you can try out in your own team with no cost, very low risk, and see if they work for you.
Makes so much sense. What I'm really taking from a lot of this is the importance of really excellent communication as a leader, but also like a safety leader in particular, right? You have to be able to communicate effectively and be able to ask the right questions and building those, I guess, those interpersonal skills. Is that what you've noticed?
You mentioned, we'll go back for a second to like the after action reviews. Some leaders might say, well, the point of an after action review is to get the insights out. It's like they're trying to extract things from people. One of the hidden benefits of an after action review is that it builds trust. I say in my keynotes and my workshops, trust is earned in droplets, but it's lost in buckets. And every one of us from time to time kicks over the bucket. We don't mean to, but we burn trust and we burn a relationship. And if we don't have a way to rebuild that trust slowly over time, that relationship may never recover. So after action reviews, because if you do them well, they're very psychologically safe. It's like turning on that faucet and just, for that 25 minutes, we get a couple of drips every time we do it. And anytime a good leader is trying to build psychological safety, it's not just about the information being communicated, it's building and deepening trust. Every time you talk, every time you relate, when you treat people with respect, what I find is you deepen the trust, and that just builds. It's like a tree growing really deep, strong roots, so that when a hurricane comes, which, an accident, to deal with the metaphor, that tree's not going to blow over because it's got that really strong root base. You have all these relationships that are strong. Whereas if you just try to use people and get stuff out of them and then go away, it's very weak connections.
And it's clear to me that there's a real momentum that kind of has to be built up here. It's not going to be a one and done sort of thing. You can't just do the after action report or try to integrate any one of these steps and then kind of walk away from it or forget about it the next week, right? These are things that have to be kind of layered on top of each other and built over time.
Like a good metaphor might be losing weight and getting fit, right? If you decide, what, I'm going to lose weight, I'm going to get fit. Maybe the beginning of the year comes around, you make a New Year's resolution. Maybe you go to your doctor and they say, listen, you got to lose some weight, and you decide you want to do it. um, what I say, and I write this in the introduction to the book, I say trying to do any one thing probably isn't going to solve it for you. So most of us have tried to lose weight. We say, I'm going to go join a gym. And I've done that. I joined a gym. At market, that didn't work. I don't know what it was. They wanted me to like actually go to the gym. I don't know what it was, but just joining the gym, I thought it was going to work. It didn't. But it's, if you do several things, in this case 7 things, kind of integrated over time, what I find is that they kind of integrate and reinforce and multiply each other. Kind of like if you decide to lose weight and you say, okay, I'm going to join a gym, but I'm not going to join the best gym I can afford, like my brother said. I'm going to join the gym closest to my house, and I'm going to park a little bit further away, not right up front, but every time I go to the store, I'm going to walk a little more. I'm going to start drinking more water and less of everything else. I'm going to start, do 4 or 5 things like that, and try to find what works for your life. What I find is, even when you bonk on one thing, like, what, I didn't walk at all this week, but I went to the gym, the other things are going to keep your network alive.
It's almost I've like the Swiss cheese kind of approach to this, where there might be holes on one, but you kind of layer it together, and eventually they'll kind of block up the hole. So you've got that extra, I guess, coverage, right? To make
This episode is powered by BIS Safety Software, one of the leading safety and compliance software applications on the market today. The team at BIS has rolled out a powerful new reporting dashboard that makes it easy to track, measure, and interpret your safety performance. From monitoring near misses to calculating TRIF, you can turn everyday form data into meaningful insights, displayed through flexible charts, counters, and trends. With customizable widgets, advanced metrics, and permission-based access, it's a smarter way to stay informed and ahead. See everything they have to offer at bissafety.ca.
Defenses, we used to call it defenses in depth. I mean, just having multiple defenses so that even if one fails, which sooner or later it's going to, you got the other ones. Yeah. Yeah. I call that a consolidation of subtleties. And that's what I found to be the solution to almost any big problem, or challenge, like safety, like, creating a good, strong safety culture and high reliability, or, trying to save for retirement, or trying to raise kids. There's no one secret to raising kids. I've asked. There is no one secret to raising kids, but after a while, you start to see 5 or 6 or 7 things that the best parents all tend to do together. And same thing for money. And in this case, there's a few things for safety and reliability.
Yeah, no, and I think that finding those ways, because to your point, things will go wrong, things will break, things are going to happen. It's inevitable. But how do we make those, weave that safety net almost in a way, right? Where we've got all these different factors that are working together to really um, get to the core of what we're doing and build that defense in a way.
They all reinforce each other too, which is kind of cool. Yeah, it's not like seven isolated things. It's like, you know, seven threads in a tapestry or something that all work together. Yeah.
You and I, before this podcast, we were talking a little bit about a model that you developed, Scan and Focus. I think this is excellent. I'd like to dig in a little bit about how you came up with this model for situational awareness, and how leaders of frontline teams can apply it to real operations that they're doing.
I situational awareness was a bit analogous to psychological safety in that when I first heard of it, I went, wow, seems important, right? And everybody that I asked went, yeah, I have situational awareness, super important. I said, great. How do you actually build it? And they went, well, you know, it's complex. Okay, great, but how do you build it? And nobody had very good answers. Some people said, well, you just got to pay attention. Okay, looking for a little more than that, but okay. Some people said, well, you just got to focus. Other people said you have to keep your head on a swivel. Strange phrase. And I went, okay, well, if I'm focusing, I can't keep my head on a swivel. If my head is on a swivel, I can't focus, but okay. And what I started realizing was different people just had different views on situational awareness. Everybody knew it was important. Um, I did the research and I found the three most popular models I could of situational awareness. One was the Micah Ensley model, Dr. Micah Ensley. She was, I've talked with her briefly. She wouldn't remember me now, and that's all right. She was chief scientist of the Air Force for a while. Very impressive. Basically, has done more research on situational awareness than anybody else, I think. Um, but her model was a little bit too academic for me. Then I found the Cooper color model, which was much more, it originated by a firearms instructor, multiple different colors. And I'm like, okay, I get the model here, but how is that going to apply to situations without, you know, guns and stuff like that? I don't know. And it didn't seem to apply very well. And the third model was called the OODA loop. I just like saying it, it's fun. The OODA loop, right? Which stands for Observe, Orient, Decide, Act. And that was created by John Boyd, who was a fighter pilot, talking about air to air combat, right? So again, I didn't know how well that's going to translate. And it turns out to me, none of those three really translated very well to just regular, normal, everyday work when people are not trying to kill you most of the time. Um, and so what I came up with was the scan and focus model. And it was basically the idea that there's two parts to situation awareness, kind of like an epoxy. You get the resin and the catalyst, you got to put them together, mix them together, and that's when you get the glue. Situation awareness, you've got scanning. Sometimes we're just scanning like a radar, and sometimes we are focusing like a laser beam. But the rub is we can't do both at the same time. You can't be a floodlight and a spotlight at the same time. Does that make sense? So what I saw was the best teams, like two-person teams, one person was scanning and the other person was focusing, and they were communicating. So even though they might be, you know, 2 feet away from each other, they're mentally were in completely different worlds. And so when they're communicating, it's almost like they formed like one functioning, situationally aware human brain together. Army sniper teams tend to work that way. Construction crane, like big crane teams tend to work that way. The crane controller, the crane operator is usually focusing. And there's a signal person on the outside directing things, usually scanning. Welders, big serious welders have that big face mask on with a little dark tinted thing window. They're focusing, they can barely see what's in front of them, the big, you know, light, but they can't see anything else. And they will often have a fire watch, somebody watching for sparks or embers, catching something behind them on fire, which the welder wouldn't see until the whole building was on fire. So a lot of teams, high performance teams, high reliability teams, use this, what I'm calling the scan and focus model. I don't know of anybody else. I don't know of anybody else on the planet that teaches it that way, except for me. But I use those examples, and most people kind of go, "Yeah, I see that." Even backing up a car, the driver generally is focusing on the spotter, and the spotter is scanning, and looking around and coming like this, and they're communicating via hand signals. Most teams that I give this to, when in the keynotes and workshops that I do, pick it up pretty quickly and wind up going, okay, here's how we can apply this to being a lineman or electrician or whatever it is. So that's kind of where it came from and how you use it.
Oh, it's interesting, sort of like with psychological safety, like with Google, they didn't have a word for it, but they kind of knew something was going on, something was important. So you must have kind of seen when you say it or put it in that way, it kind of does it click for the audiences a little bit?
Some of the best compliments that I get are from 20-year veterans who've been doing lineman work or manufacturing or safety or any other kind of technical profession, and they take my workshops, so they see my keynotes, and they come back and they say, Jake, I realize that I've been doing scan and focus for 20 years and trying to teach people that. I just thought it was my crazy, silly way of doing it, but you gave me a name for it, which is super helpful, and the research backing, and you let me know that I wasn't crazy after all. So the many of the best people that I've talked with, um, I don't want to say many of them, some people will come up to me and go, Jake, I've been doing this for 20 years and you just described how I think, and I've never heard it described that way before. That's when I know I've gotten something right.
And that's got to be incredibly gratifying as well to kind of see, okay, again, all of these practices that we can put on paper, they're actually applicable in real life. We can actually apply them and make use of them here.
How you can teach them and explain them, and kind of, it's always nice to have a label to put on something to kind of go, hey, scan and focus or situational awareness, as opposed to that thing where Robert does the thing with the guy in that place that gets really vague really quickly, right? So yeah.
Oh, having worked with organizations all over, right, in many different industries, what are some of those stories of, I guess, like turnaround stories where you're able to come in and really make an impact on their program, what they had in place, and get some of that feedback?
One group that I've worked with, and I don't tend to do a lot of the larger like organizational change stuff. I'm a one person company, so I tend to work with at the level of teams, not at the level of 10,000 or 50,000 person organizations. There are people that do that, and I've worked with them to some degree, but I tend to do the small group stuff better. It's just where I can communicate and see people and doing a workshop, and I get the feedback immediately. However, I worked with one organization, had about 4,000 people there, and I gave a lot of my workshops, and the lead investigator, I will call her Sandy. Sandy's a real person, um, wonderful person to work with, and incredibly skilled. One of the best investigators I've ever met, like career investigator. And she took my workshop on, where is it? Whoops, on event reviews, which is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, step 4 in there. And she said, I have been looking for something like this for 20 years. It's a non-punitive way of looking at events, not to figure out who screwed up and who to fire, but how to improve the process. Um, and I kept giving the workshops at that organization to leaders, managers, directors, frontline people, but I also kind of mentored her a little bit, but she didn't need much mentoring. She got it and said, okay, there's a lot of rules where I have to work at. So I can't just take your idea lock, stock, and barrel, but I'm going to take parts of it and infuse it into what we already do, what we have to do. She was kind of like flying under the radar, and I loved it. And in about 3 years, she completely transformed a very punitive investigation process, which everybody was scared of, into so much trust in psychological safety that people were coming to her saying, "Hey, Sandy, we just decommissioned a building that had asbestos and other residue and stuff in it, complex, nasty stuff, and the job went great. And do you want to debrief it and share the lessons learned?" They didn't have to share any of that. They trusted her enough because they knew she was taking a non-punitive approach, and really, really transformed things in that organization. Yeah.
So, in a way, once you've got that in place, even if the project goes well, because the crews and the teams have seen the beneficial impact of doing those debriefs, in a way, it's no matter how well the project goes, everyone will want to continue to kind of go over and see what else we can kind of build on that success in a way, right? Almost like when a sports team is really doing well and they still are looking to improve like that little bit more, right? Because there's always a little bit more to go.
That's a great example. I'm not big into sports. My wife is much more so, following basketball and stuff right now. But yeah, think of your favorite sports team: basketball, football, soccer, hockey, whatever it is. And think about when they win a game. Do they sit down afterwards and debrief how that game went, even though they won? Or do they just debrief games that they lose? What would happen if, whenever they won a game, they didn't talk about it? They just moved on. And the only time they sat down and talked and debriefed was when they lost. How do you think those debriefs would go? One word: "Yeah, I don't like this. Yeah, we're done. Yeah, we lost. Too bad." You get no information. And that's what happens if you only discuss and debrief jobs that go south on you. The secret, and it's the only solution, is to debrief, to do 90%, 80, 90% of your debriefs, your after action reviews, for jobs that go well. That's the
Well,
secret.
it makes complete sense. And you imagine, like, if you only do it for the jobs that go poorly, then everyone will start to associate the debrief with jobs that go poorly. So it's it would kind of be a negative reinforcement in a way, I imagine.
Then you're in kind of a feedback. So then you're kind of circling the drain, going, we don't want to discuss these. Let's get out of these. Let's just do another job. Oh, we didn't do it very well. Now we got to do another debrief. I hate this. I hate this. And that's the cycle you want to stay out of. The cycle you want to get into is, hey, we did a job. It went pretty well, but there's some room for improvement. Let's debrief the job. Nobody screwed up. We're just talking about what we did and what we learned from it. And then it's like, even if you take away one lesson, you try it out the next day, you do things a little bit better. And then, because you tried it out and it worked well, you want to talk about it. And at the debrief for that day, you get to say, "Hey, listen, I tried an experiment and it worked." Now you want to go see what else you got. And you try more experiments, and and if you get successful at it, you want to debrief more. And that's the positive feedback cycle to get in. You want to stay out of this one. You want to get into this one. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And building that momentum is huge. I'm curious, having now taught these concepts and being in the safety space for a while. What do you find are some of the key elements of a really exceptional safety talk or safety lessons? Things that make sure that it sticks the next day, because what I hear about constantly is you can have speak as many speakers as you want come in, but sometimes it just doesn't stick, or they walk out and it's in one ear out the other kind of thing. What have you found really make sure the message stays with everyone that's there?
Interesting question, because now you're kind of bridging my two worlds of and I hesitate to say safety because I'm not a classically trained safety person. I don't have a safety degree. Yes, I worked in a safety department for 10 years, but that was all, I was in training for quite a bit of it. And then I really went into the human performance, which is that and the high reliability organization. So I hesitate to call myself a safety expert. I will say that I have some expertise, but it's more focused on this. but you're kind of getting into my old world, which is more training and teaching, which I love. Obviously, I do that and now a lot. To answer your question, there's so many elements for communicating something that sticks. I'll mention this because you asked, and it's funny, you even used the term. This is an older book. This is an incredibly good book. I would challenge anybody to read the opening story. And that is one technique that I use called a cold open. You just start with a story. And I'd challenge anybody to read the opening story. It's 4 or 5 pages, and then put down the book and say, now I'm boring. I don't want to read the book. I don't think I've met anybody who's done that. So some of the techniques in here are going to be fantastic. I definitely use some or most of them. But to answer your question, couple of elements that I find in the best, most influential people, especially in safety. One, they're good storytellers. They they don't just say, "Well, here's a concept, and remember to do this." That's academic. It's purely cognitive. There's nothing resonates emotionally. Stories stick because for you know thousands of years, human beings have communicated through stories, right? So stories stick. Get to be a good storyteller is one thing. Two, get your facts straight, do your homework. Um, for many years, people were teaching the Heinrich pyramid of, you know, 3 fatalities and 30 injuries and 300 near misses, something like that. And people were just echoing that without ever looking into the facts and the research behind it. Now that that's been pretty thoroughly debunked, a lot of people are catching on. I always try to check my facts, and I've had a couple of people catch me and kind of go, Jake, I think you got your facts straight there. And you better believe that's pretty embarrassing when I'm doing a workshop or something like that. But I'll tell you, I had that happen once, maybe twice, and I went through and checked like literally all my facts and all my presentations and changed a couple of others. So, one, be a good storyteller. Two, get your facts straight. Even be able to quote them from memory, like I did with Abershelf. Memorize a few that you can drop whenever you need to. And third, I'd say is kind of like in marketing, uh, end with a call to action. Give people an action to take. Read this book. Try out an after action review. Download my handout. Read their books, but read my book. Um, give people something to do to try out on their own. That's it. Tell a story, get your facts straight, give people an action to take on their own. Those are three big elements that I think people can use.
That makes complete sense. And I think anybody, really, no matter the industry or the space they're in, can kind of take those practices and implement them. It's not necessarily specific to, like you said, to your point, with safety or anything, right?
No, yeah. No, that's a good point. I mean, I speak a lot for a living, and some of the best speakers that I've seen do that. If they're on for an hour, hour and a half, they won't just tell a 30-minute story. It's lots of small stuff. Like they'll tell an opening story, give a concept, and then go, if you like this and you think it'll work for you, try this out. And then there's another story. And they just go through that cycle over and over. Yeah.
Sure, so many people have learned from your work and what you've done. I'm curious, who do you look up to? Who are your mentors out there that are kind of, helping guide your philosophy?
Oh, it's I've had several. I've been a mentor and I've had mentors, and both of those experiences have changed my life for the better. Um, I feel bad for people who have never really had a good mentor because it's such a life-changing thing. Um, where would Luke Skywalker be without Obi-Wan? And Obi-Wan without Yoda, right? Somebody gave me that little Yoda up there as that I keep as a great reminder and as a sense of the great responsibility of mentoring. Um, when somebody allows you to have that kind of influence and input on your life, it's a huge responsibility. I'll say that I've had several great mentors, the chief of the fire department that I was in a long time ago created the first learning-based culture that I was ever in. I thought every organization worked that way. I was 19. Boy, was I stupid. Um, um, I don't know that I've had any specific safety mentors that specifically in the safety realm that stayed with me for a long time. Obviously, I've had a lot of colleagues that have given me great input, but I'll say there's the work of a few people that I've read, even though they haven't been a mentor, their work has truly inspired me. One would be David Martz, and he's done great work on something called the just culture. Um, he's a former lawyer and former engineer, so wicked smart, as they say up in New England. Um, but I've talked with him a few times. I wouldn't expect him to remember me, but I really like some of his work on balancing a learning based approach with responsibility for doing reckless stuff. Which there's some of each thing. You can't just I don't agree with the blame solves nothing statement. Some people in my work claim that. I disagree with that. Um, anyway, David Marks would be one. Another one would be Gary Klein. He's a researcher in decision making, and he does invented what's called naturalistic decision making, which is studying decision making out in the wild, not in the lab, but talk with firefighter battalion chiefs or military commanders or nurses, not as they're working on a patient, but I mean, right afterwards, and ask them, how do you actually make decisions in the ICU as opposed to trying to study stuff in a lab, which is clinical, but it it's not that realistic or adaptive. So I really like Gary Klein's work. My own decision making model, which is somewhere in here. I think it's in chapter 9 in the resilience one. Um, I think it is an echo of that. I'm certainly not copying Gary Klein's work, but I think it's compatible with the naturalistic style that he approaches or offers. Those are two big people that jump to mind that I really like their work so far. Yeah.
It, to me, what stands out is there's a variety of different perspectives and places that all of those individuals come from, and it's neat that you're able to sort of pull from all of them, right? And there's not necessarily, they don't have to come from just one specialty, right? They can come from really not anywhere, but they can come from a variety of different places, and you can kind of integrate them into your work.
That's one of the things that makes me a little bit different and unique among speakers or human performance or human reliability people is I'm not a 20-year expert in one thing. I didn't, operate nuclear power plants for 20 years, or I wasn't the officer in a nuclear submarine for 10 years. Some of my colleagues do stuff like that. I try to draw from being a paratrooper, being an EMT, the firefighter, the PhD, the 10 years experience in an electric utility, looking at over 300 incidents, some big, some small. You're right. I'm trying to pull the best I can and see the patterns from all of those things. And there's a lot of patterns that connect. But I've got a lot more varied experience, I think, than most people do. But the drawback to that is I've been a bit of a nomad. I haven't done one thing except this job for, you know, more than 10 years. Well, that's not true. I did the electric utility, but that's it.
It's interesting in a way. I guess bringing it back to the scan and focus, you've scanned a lot of the different, right? You've done a lot of scanning, and in that there's a ton of value. Just like with the focusing, right? We've got to have people that have focused on one space, but you've also got to be able to step back and look around and really be able to pull from multiple different areas. At least that kind of stands out to me. I don't know if that's a fair assessment.
I had a recent client who was very skeptical. He saw the PhD and he's like, "Yeah, I've looked at PhDs before." And then we talked and we actually had dinner. And by the end of the dinner, he said, "Yeah, I think I want you to um, come do the keynote for us because," he said, "I think you can connect with the executives." And he was an executive all the way down to the frontline guys who sweat the pipes, throw the breakers, turn the wrenches, and everybody in between. And I'd like to think that's something I can do because I've worn boots for a living. I was enlisted, not an officer, in the Army, Army National Guard, and everything in between. So yeah, I think being able to communicate across industries and up and down kind of organizational chains, that's a pretty wide target that I can aim for.
Jake, we've talked about a lot today. I'm curious if you could pick one piece of advice to give yourself back when you were just starting out on this journey. What would that advice be?
Oh wow, that is a good question. Wow. You know, what do you know now that you wish you had known then? Kind of thing. Um, it, it would probably have to be spend more time in the field with the guys and the women doing the actual work. The concept of work as imagined versus work as done. Work as imagined is like what's written on paper, right? How the work should get done, but almost never gets done that way. And the work is done is not on paper. It's what the guys and the women actually do to get stuff done. And there's so much, that's what Gary Klein studies. Um, that's what I tend to like to study and look at, the practical field expedient world of how stuff actually gets done. And I think I would have benefited a lot more from spending even more time. I spent some definitely, but even spending more time in the field, watching and even helping out with folks doing stuff. Yeah, that would have been. That's the one thing I think I wish I had done a little bit more. I did some of it, but you can almost never get enough of that.
I think that's an incredible answer, and I think it just goes to show how much there is to learn from all the different, um, you know, men and women out there doing the work, boots on the ground, right? We can always learn a little bit more. Um, Jake, I want to thank you so much for coming on today. I think this was incredibly valuable. Where can people find your work and what you're up to?
You for asking. The new book is on Amazon, hardback, softback, ebook, and now audiobook as well. I joke, although it's true. My wife said she's going to wait for the audiobook. I'm like, it's out now, so no more excuses. So there's out there for that. Also, I'm on LinkedIn. It's the only social media I'm on. My last name is pretty easy to find. Not too many of us out there. And of course, I have my website with a lot of resources, videos, and stuff like that on it. And that is reliableorg.com.
We'll include the links down below. Jake, thank you again.